الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين ونصلي ونسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Now, so moving on, we were going through the discussion regarding an intro, and we mentioned a little bit regarding some of the main usul of the Hanafiya, and now we will mention regarding the method or the way this strand of usul al-Fiqh deals with the presentation of masail and the way the books are organized, etc. So we say يعتمد الحنفية في تأسيس قواعدهم الأصولية على ما نقل عن أئمتهم من الفروع الفقهية فالأصول عندهم مبنية على الفروع ومقررة لها وليست حاكمة عليها. This is really important. Basically in usul there are three levels that you have. Three levels, and we explained this previously, so I will just briefly go through this again just to refresh the memory. The first level is the adilla muqarrirah, the adilla that establish the proofs that are meant to establish the second level, which is the qawaid usuliyah. So there are certain adilla aqliya as well as lughawiyya that will be used to establish the qawaid usuliyya. And then from the qawaid usuliyya you go to level 3, which is by applying these qawaid usuliyya you arrive at furu' fiqhiyya. Let's just take a simple example of this so we understand what is being intended over here. For example, we have the qaida usuliyya, which is in step number 2, al-amru lil-wujub. Number 3, which is the far' fiqhi, would be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying aqimu as-salah. So when Allah says aqimu as-salah, right, this is amr, and we're able to establish from this as-salatu wajibah. As-salatu wajibah. How do we arrive at as-salatu wajibah? By using the qaida, which is al-amru lil-wujub, in number 3, which is aqimu as-salah, and that's how we arrived at as-salatu wajibah. How do you prove though al-amru lil-wujub? This is a linguistic discussion. So we can use adilla lughawiyya, right? We can bring ash'ar of the Arabs, ash'ar. We can also bring nusus over here of the Quran, or the statements of the Salaf rahimahumullah. And we can also, along with ash'ar and nusus of the Quran, we can also bring adilla aqliya, like tahsin taqbih, like if we were to use this statement, then it would result in so on and so forth. Okay, these are all proofs that are used to prove, number 1, the qaida, okay, because the qaida is influential in the furu' fiqhiyya. The normal way you would assume that this entire process takes place is you first start off with number 1, and number 1 you will debate adilla, you will use adilla, and through those adilla we establish number 2. Okay, number 2 is debatable. Like, what is the qaida usuliyya? And that qaida, like for example, if someone said, I don't agree that al-amru lil-wujub, I believe al-amru lil-istihbab. I believe if someone were to say al-amru lil-istihbab. طبعا, if someone says this, that I believe al-amru lil-istihbab, then in that situation, the third step, which is being application of this qaida, would change. So you wouldn't arrive at the conclusion of as-salatu wajibah. Why would you not arrive at that conclusion? Because over here, amr is found, but amr to begin with is not actually for wujub, it's for istihbab. Amr to begin with is not actually for wujub, it's for istihbab. طيب. So now, this is the case with if someone were to change the qaida. How do you now debate with someone who believes that al-amru al-istihbab? We have to go to number 1 and debate the points, debate the actual qawaid. So the actual way this is supposed to work is you start off with number 1. From number 1 you arrive at number 2, and after you achieve number 2, then you apply that to the furu' and you extract aḥkām far'iyya and you get number 3. That is the technical order that's supposed to be taking place. In the books of the Hanafiya, they don't follow that order. They actually go the opposite way. So they already have furu' fiqhiyya from their a'imma. So you have Zahir al-Riwayah, and you have the takhrijat of some of the later scholars as well, right? You already have furu' fiqhiyya. We already have the furu' fiqhiyya. But our a'imma, yani the Hanafi scholars, such as Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad and Abu Hassan and Abu Yusuf al-Qadi, and the early scholars of the Hanafiya, they never classified or clarified for us number 2. So number 2 is unknown. And طبعا number 2 is unknown. Number 1 is not even a question right now because we don't even know number 2. So what the Hanafiya did in the few centuries after Imam, now number 2 exists, that's definite. Like, does this exist? 100% it exists. Because you can only arrive at number 3 using number 2. And so it was being applied by Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad and Imam Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, but they didn't write it down for us. So we might not be aware of it, but 100% it exists. There's no doubt that it actually exists. And the 2 centuries right after Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, what did the scholars do? They tried to, by looking through all of the furu' fiqhiyya, they tried to trace back and backtrack, and using reverse engineering, they tried to go back and determine what the number 2 was using the furu', which is the qawaid. The determining of number 2 using the furu', which is the qawaid, which is backtracking, reverse engineering. And that's what they did. And their books were mainly, their debates in reality were not really number 1. They weren't really debating the qawaid aqli. They were debating, yes, how do we determine the qawaid usuliyya? They were debating them, not the adilla aqliyya, but the qawaid usuliyya, they were debating them. But their debates were like, no, my qaida usuliyya is more probable because it's more in line with the furu' fiqhiyya of our imam. This other qaida usuliyya that you might be suggesting is the actual Hanafi stance is improbable because it's not as much in line with the furu' of the imam. So this is what they were engaged in. So their books became more commonly associated with number 2 and number 3. Now, طبعا, in the first 2 centuries after the Imam, so we're talking about the 3rd and 4th century, eventually they agreed. Yani the Hanafi stance became solidified and it became understood as to what the qawaid usuliyya are for the Hanafi madhhab. That became understood and it was agreed upon. However, that being said, 100% it was agreed upon. There's no doubt in that. But that being said, that doesn't mean that initially there wasn't a debate. There was a debate. Al-Jassas al-Razi, for example, sometimes I'll mention this. Abu al-Hasan al-Karkhi, for example, he held, just as an example that you guys have come across before, al-amru lit-tarahi, okay, or al-amru al-fawr. And the majority of the Hanafiya say no, al-amru lit-tarahi. And this was a debate that was held. Al-Jassas al-Razi, he'll bring, for example, in al-Fusul fil Usul, sometimes I agree with my teacher Abu Hasan al-Karkhi, sometimes I don't agree with him. Abu Sa'id al-Barda'i, for example, he held a certain opinion. I might agree with him, I might not agree with him. And I will bring the furu' to prove that my opinion is correct. Then al-Dabusi will do the same thing. Al-Bazdawi, Sarakhsi, we're going to mention these names, will do the same thing. But this ended up happening, but eventually this did happen in the beginning. But eventually there was an adopted ideology that was pretty much just accepted. And since then, that has become the mu'tamad until now. And what was that ideology? The one that was adopted by al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi in their 2 books of Usul. We're going to mention these scholars as well. طيب. Now what you find after al-Bazdawi al-Sarakhsi, post al-Bazdawi al-Sarakhsi, is pretty much in the books just mentioning the qaida and mentioning the furu'. So you find these 2 things mentioned. Number 1, you don't find it mentioned at all. Seldomly will they talk about number 1. In Usul al-Shāshī, in certain places, he gives ishara. هكذا يشير. He gives ishara towards number 1 as well. In Mabahith of Amr, he gave ishara towards number 1. Okay, but he usually doesn't do that. Usually that's not the idea. Usually the idea is number 2 and number 3, and that's it. Number 2 will be mentioned, the qaida will be mentioned, and how the furu' are extracted from that qaida, that will be mentioned, and that is it. So, يقول ابن خلدون ثم كتب فقهاء الحنفية ثم كتب فقهاء الحنفية فيه وحققوا تلك القواعد وأوسعوا القول فيه وكتب المتكلمون أيضا كذلك إلا أن كتابة الفقهاء فيه أمس بالفقه وأليق بالفروع لكثرة الأمثلة فيها والشواهد وبناء المسائل فيها على النكت الفقهية. Okay, the Hanafi books are filled with number 3. They mention a lot of qawaid fiqhiyya, far'iyya, that not masail fiqhiyya far'iyya that are stemming from number 2, which is the qawaid. This is the miza of the Hanafi tariqah. As for the usul al-mutakallimin, which is usul al-jumhur, the second strand of usul, they are primarily focused on number 1, and by way of number 1, establishing number 2. They very rarely go to number 3. You can go through an entire book of usul that is mentioned amongst the mutakallimun where they barely mention even 1 or 2 examples of an actual fiqhi mas'ala. Whereas the Hanafi books are filled with fiqhi masail. Far'iyya, fiqhiyya, masail, far'iyya, fiqhiyya, they're filled with them, and they're showing you how those masail are reflections of the qawaid usuliyya. Like, you know, the interesting part, where it becomes interesting, is because this is backtracking. And because this is trying to show examples upon the qawaid usuliyya. The Hanafiyya can also differ. And sometimes Ahnaf might agree on the qaida. Like they might agree on the qaida. But they might differ whether a specific far' from the furu' fiqhiyya is actually a direct or a correct observation of that qaida or not. A correct implementation of that qaida or not. A correct example upon that qaida or not. This also becomes really interesting. So when you're studying Ḥanafī Uṣūl, what you're really now, we're going to start exposing you to in Uṣūl al-Shāshī specifically. In the previous level, the idea was not exposing you to these debates regarding amthila. We wanted to bring very good examples. That's why I wasn't resorting to what was being used in Mabadi al-Uṣūl. We had another book that we used just for that. So we brought very good examples that are lesser contested. But in Uṣūl al-Shāshī, the way we're going to study this, inshallah ta'ala, is that we're actually going to contest the examples. Why? Not because we feel like the author brought broad examples, but because in reality, if you go to the mutawalat, if you go to the books of shuruh and you shuruh al-Bazdawi and so on and so forth, like Kashf al-Asrar and so on and so forth, you will find that they contest examples. They actually debate, is this actually an example that is truly reflective of the qaida usuliyya or not? They debate it. Because the furu' fiqhiyya examples are being mentioned. But does that mean every Hanafi scholar agrees that this example is actually a correct reflection of that qaida? The answer is no. The answer is no. They debated these things. So that will be, we will expose you to that a lot more now in Uṣūl al-Shāshī, inshallah ta'ala, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, in our study of Uṣūl al-Shāshī. طيب. So we're not using, again, like I said, guys, we're not using Uṣūl al-Shāshī for primarily doing ta'sil in the science of Uṣūl al-Fiqh. That was meant to be done in the first level. We are using Uṣūl al-Shāshī for the level which is between ta'sil, after you already have a degree of the primary main ta'sil, between that and the next level, which is like a lot more tahqiq, but between that, slowly starting to expose you to the idea that there can be debates regarding these examples. You can contest the examples. Not only can you contest the examples, you can also contest the qawaid. That's also done in the mutawalat. So in the later books of the Hanafi Uṣūl, you'll get exposed to a lot of contesting, not only regarding the examples that are being presented, but even the qawaid themselves. Like not all the Hanafis, as I mentioned before, like pre-Bazdawi and Sarakhsi, they themselves differ on the qawaid themselves. So it exposes you to something even beyond that. Yeah, that will be the plan, inshallah ta'ala. طيب. What are the mumayyazat of the usul of the Hanafi? So this is the general way the Hanafi usul we explain. What are the khasa'is? What are the special, exclusive features of this type of usul as opposed to the strand of mutakallimin? طيب. Number one, now again, if you don't know what the strand of mutakallimin is versus the strand of the Hanafi and so on and so forth, we already did an advanced intro, around 9, I believe 10 to 12 lessons, regarding just how all these strands came into existence and what mutakallimun means and what tariqat al-fuqaha means and all these different strands and how all these strands actually go back to the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and who influenced what strand from the Sahaba radiallahu anhu ajma'in and what are the main components of these strands. What we're mentioning over here is a brief summary from that intro. The intro will have a lot more detail regarding all of this, inshallah ta'ala, if anyone wants to look at that. And we would suggest that yes, while you're studying Uṣūl al-Shāshī, or even before Uṣūl al-Shāshī, or right after Uṣūl al-Shāshī, you should definitely go through some sort of a serious introduction regarding how the ilm works and the historical evolution regarding the ilm. There are books that might be compiled regarding this as well. And I'm sure there are books, but in our course, like the intro was gathered from different books, so it's multiple things in the same place, from what we were able to find, which was beneficial, and we thought we would actually present a historical evolution that starts from the time of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is usul al-fiqh qabla al-tadween, how he applied it, how the Sahaba applied it, how that influenced the strands, how the strands came into existence, what was the purpose of each strand, what are the main books of each strand, how do you study and master each strand, what are the main differences in each strands, and how these strands eventually end up overlapping in the future as well. All of that was discussed in the intro. What are some of, for now, we're just going to summarize all of this briefly, just so that we can start with the book quickly, inshallah ta'ala. What are some of the mumayyazat of the tariqah of the Hanafiya? Number one, بناء القواعد على الفروع وليس العكس. Subhanallah. The qawaid are actually being extracted from the furu' fiqhiyya and not the opposite. The qawaid are actually being extracted from the furu' fiqhiyya, not the opposite. You know what this means, ahbab? This means that no Hanafi can come later on, claim to be a Hanafi, and try and prove that according to the methodology of the Hanafis, Imam Muhammad got something wrong, or Imam Abu Yusuf got something wrong, or Imam Abu Hanifa got something. It's impossible, because that is the very definition of the Hanafi madhab. The qaida could be wrong. Your understanding, the methodology could be wrong. The far' is not wrong. You have to judge the qaida based on the far' fiqhi. طيب. إذا كان المتكلمون قد اعتنوا بتحقيق القواعد بناء على النظر والاستدلال فإن الحنفية جعلوا الفروع أساسا لضبط تلك القواعد وهم يقررونها ليقيسوا بها فروع مذهبهم ويثبتوا سلامتها بهذه المقاييس ويتزودون بها في مقام الجدل والمناظرة. We use the فروع to determine the validity of a hukum in the Hanafi school of thought. This is so important. And if you study Hidayah, ahbab, so Hidayah is filled with this. Filled with this. In every single mas'ala, especially in the ibadat, it's a little bit the beginning of Hidayah, that's obviously a lot to do with adilla naqliya as well. But as soon as you go into mu'amalat, from Hidayah Thani, so Kitab al-Nikah onwards, every single mas'ala, the main dalail they're using is qiyas upon other furu' fiqhiyah. They're using the mi'yar of determining which takhrij, which further evaluation, which further elaboration of the madhab is correct. The mi'yar of determining it is other furu' within the madhab. Ya salam. That is the mi'yar of determining which opinion is correct. So for example, Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala holds an opinion, Abu Yusuf holds an opinion. We say the reason why Abu Hanifa holds his opinion, this is qiyas upon so-and-so fara'. Abu Yusuf rahimahullah ta'ala, the reason why he holds that opinion is that he's doing qiyas upon so-and-so fara'. So he understands this illah, Abu Hanifa understands this illah. Like the illah, for example, of Abu Yusuf is incorrect, and this is the fariq, and this is the reason why it's incorrect, and this is the reason why Abu Hanifa's wajh makes more sense. For example, right? What you're doing is you're literally doing qiyas and a comparison within other furu' fiqhiyah within the madhab to determine which far' fiqhi is correct. And that is something that you don't find in the other madhab anywhere close to the level that is found in the Hanafi school of thought. So it's a school of thought that refines itself. It's a school of thought which refines itself. نعم. يقول ابن خلدون فكان لفقهاء الحنفية فيها اليد الطولى من الغوض على النكت الفقهية والتقاط هذه القوانين من مسائل الفقه ما أمكن. Number 2, كثرة الفروع والمسائل الفقهية. This is really important too. What brings usul to life is its application, not the theory. The theory, the theoretical discussions, it's there, alhamdulillah, it's beneficial, it's good. But what really will make you feel like you understand usul and you are an usuli and you are able to apply it and you're able to extract it and you're able to implement and so on and so forth is application. Application is what brings it to life. Application is what brings it to life, not theory. One of the mistakes and the problems with usul al-jumhur is that they became so preoccupied, meaning usul al-mutakallimin, that strand, they became so preoccupied with the theoretical side. They became so preoccupied with the theoretical side that the whole purpose of usul, which is to produce a malaka fiqhiyya and produce genuine fuqaha, that purpose was not actually being achieved. In fact, all that was being achieved by studying their works of usul al-fiqh was learning how to debate from an aqli standpoint. So it became more like a practice of ilm al-mantiq and nadar and qiyas in mantiq and how qiyas is applied, and the adilla aqliya, the rational sciences, and how do you use the rational proofs to argue your point. It became more of a practice of that than it became a practice of fiqh. So it wasn't really, it was more like an application of the adilla aqliya, the rules of the adilla aqliya that you study in mantiq and nadar and jadal and munadara, as opposed to an application of those qawaid upon the furu' fiqhiyya to teach you fiqh. Okay, so it's more like applying the adilla aqliya and debating them and knowing how to apply them correctly, a practice of that, as opposed to using qawaid to make you practice fiqh. So it doesn't establish a malaka fiqhiyya in the people, in the students. Rather, it is more so establishing, it's meant to establish a malaka in rational argumentation. طيب. Now, that is also good. We're not saying that's not good. Like, that has its own faida. That has its own purpose. It has its own gharad. And it has its own people. And people will engage in that. And that's fine. There's no problem with that. Like, it won't establish the malaka fiqhiyya. That's why the student that trains upon the Hanafi school of thought, the malaka fiqhiyya that he will be able to establish, and his idrak and insight will, wallahu a'lam, my understanding is that it will be far stronger than if someone were to train upon the other madhab. And yes, each madhab has a fa'idah. Don't misunderstand. Each madhab has a fa'idah. Like, for example, the adilla naqliya, knowing the masail in line with the adilla naqliya, which madhab would be the strongest in that? The Hanbali and the Shafi'i madhab. There's no doubt. Okay, why? Because they teach their books of fiqh using adilla naqliya a lot. A lot of adilla naqliya, a lot of ahadith, a lot of nusus. They're always resorting to ahadith and nusus. So, if you ask a Hanbali faqih, for example, the mas'ala, he'll be able to quote the adilla off the top of his head all the time. Very quickly, very often. But what it establishes is knowing the dalil naqli for the specific qaida. But as we mentioned previously, this dalil naqli, the adilla naqliya, they're limited. They're not unlimited. So we have a limit to how many adilla naqliya we have aslan. طيب. Is that important? Of course it's important. Why? Because since we have a limit to our adilla naqliya, what does that result in? That results in another problem. And what's that other problem? That problem is that all those masail which don't have adilla naqliya, how do we extract rulings regarding them, and how do we explain the rulings? So you'll always find that some people have this mentality or this practice where whenever a masla comes up, they're like, what's the dalil? What's the hadith? What's the hadith? طيب, the hadith, you're not going to find it for the majority of masail. If someone asks you, for example, can you, open a mushaf on a phone and touch it without wudu, you're not going to find that in any hadith. Okay. The majority of the masail far'iyya, you're not going to find them in a hadith. So now, when you're not able to find them in a hadith, then you're left puzzled, thinking, okay, what's the hukum over here? You don't know. Because you're so used to resorting and relying on a hadith themselves. And over here, you're not going to find any hadith. طيب. Whereas the Hanafi school of thought teaches you, it trains your mind to be able to use the qawa'id usuliyah. It trains your mind to be able to use the qawa'id usuliyah. So let's say someone comes and asks you a question, and they ask you a question regarding a very specific fara'. And you think to yourself, you know what, to be honest, I don't know any hadith that relates to this, and I can't even remember reading it in any of the books. But because you attained the malaka fiqhiyya and you know the usul, in your mind, you're able to think what most likely would be the hukum in this scenario based on the usul. You're able to think that. And you're able to apply it. And al-Bazdawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, in fact, all of you can look this up, inshallah, and we'll send in the group as well. Look up in the beginning of Usul al-Bazdawi. Al-Bazdawi, he gave a definition of fiqh. In that definition of fiqh, he mentioned a few important things. He mentioned fiqh is three levels. In the second level, he mentioned this point. He said, what is real fiqh? Real fiqh is that you learn the masail as extractions, as they're being extracted from their usul and qawa'id. You understand how qawa'id result in masail. Therefore, even if you don't remember the fara', as long as you remember the asl, you're able to extract the fara'. This is real faqaha. Real faqaha is not that you memorize the furu'. The furu' are endless. In fact, you can never memorize all of the furu' because they're endless. Okay, so sitting down, for example, and memorizing a poem, a manzuma, that will give you 1,000 furu', this is not a malaka fiqhiyya. You're just parroting what you memorize. And if someone asks you something regarding what you memorize, alhamdulillah. If not, then no. Okay, the tariqah of the shanaqata, for example, this is their tariqah. They didn't memorize. But if you ask them anything outside of their mahfudat, then it's difficult. Because the training was not done, the training of the mind was not done to be able to extract, it was done to memorize. Okay, of course, there's shanaqata that are geniuses and beyond that as well. Like in overall the tariqah, I'm talking about the turuq. Okay, طبعا there are shanaqata ulama that are also very strong in fahm and understanding and extraction as well. And they didn't only rely on memorization. But overall, the tariqah is heavily reliant on memorization. Like the tariqah of the Hanafi is heavily reliant on fahm. So you'll find usually Hanafi scholars are not memorizing. Like if you ask them a mas'ala, they're going to give you the response, but they're not going to be able to quote some manzuma and tell you that Fulan says this and these are the conditions, and as if they're reading out of a book. That's not what you're going to find. But you're going to find detailed, genuine, good responses if they're truly trained upon the madhab the way it's meant to be trained upon. So one of the best things of this madhab is that it will be able to grant you this type of a training, and it will prepare you to be able to extract masail even if you're not aware of the actual the source itself. Okay, and that training starts in the books of Usul al-Fiqh, and it only increases. So the Usul al-Fiqh, the books of Usul al-Fiqh are like a tool. They're meant to train you, to teach you how that process works, so that when you go to Hidayah, then when you go to Quduri, the Shuruh of Quduri or Hidayah, and then when you go beyond, then you're able to apply it, and you understand what the kalam of the fuqaha is, and you understand the wujuh that they're using to debate the masail. طيب. Then he says, number 3, الدراسة الأصولية المقارنة. طيب, this is also really beautiful, which is that the early scholars, as I mentioned, they debated the qawaid, which was number 2. They debated these qawaid. Why did they? But they debated these qawaid in light of the masail. In light of the masail. Okay. What this teaches you is a degree of usul muqaran. It teaches you how to debate the qawaid in light of the masail, as opposed to the tariq of jumhur, which is debating the qawaid in light of the adilla aqliyah that are meant to result in those qawaid. It teaches you another way of debating qawaid, which is debating it from the result perspective. This is slightly different. Why? It's really interesting, because let's say there's someone who is a muqallid of Imam al-Shāfi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. We know the nata'ij. But this muqallid of Imam al-Shāfi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, let's say he holds on to a qa'idah which actually in reality which should not result in the furu' fiqhiyya that he's upon. Now you can use in debates ilzam upon that individual and tell him that, okay, wait, you are upon the qawaid of Imam al-Shāfi'i rahimahullah ta'ala and the masail and aḥkām of Imam al-Shāfi'i rahimahullah. Why is it the case then that you yourself are going against your own application of these qawaid in so and so furu'? So like in this fara', in this fara', in this fara', in this fara', you're not actually applying the qa'idah. You're applying something else. Why is that the case? This ilzam is possible. طيب. And this will be trained upon in the Ḥanafī طريقة. Number 4, قلة المصطلحات المنطقية والمباحث الكلامية. طيب, this is really important as well. The fuqaha, because they were approaching it from a mas'ala perspective, they weren't too focused on the mabahith mantiqiyya and the precision of the adilla and the refining of the adilla and the words that they were using and X, Y, and Z. They were more focused on how does it allow you to arrive at the fara'? How does it allow you to arrive at the actual conclusion? How does it allow you to arrive at the masail? How do the masail influence these qawaid? That's what they were more focused on. And so it's kalam of the fuqaha. Yani its kalam doesn't have that much matana meaning precision. It's kalam of the fuqaha. As for the mutakallimun, usul al-mutakallimin, because that usul is compiled by scholars of kalam. Like, why is it called usul al-mutakallimin? Because it was compiled by scholars of kalam. Okay, so because it's compiled by scholars of kalam, they are very, very precise in their wording, very careful as to what wordings they use in the definitions and in the adilla. How are you wording the dalil? Oh, this goes against, applying the qawaid of mantiq in their books. طبعا, one of the ironies of all ironies is that greatest irony ever is that majority of the mutakallimun today, like the ones that are jumhur, so the Malikiyya, the Shafi'iyya, and Hanabila, right? After the Salafi influence, what ends up happening is that they start saying studying mantiq is haram and studying kalam is haram. But then they're still resorting to the books of the mutakallimun in usul, because those are the only scholars that compile books in their usul. The Hanbali madhab doesn't have books compiled by non-mutakallimun in usul. The Shafi'i madhab doesn't have books but compiled by non-mutakallimun in usul. They were all Ash'ari. Same thing with the Maliki madhab. So when they want to understand the usul that their madhab is founded upon, they have to go study those books. But then they try and study those books that are purely an application of mantiq, an application of rational sciences, like kalam and mantiq. They're trying to study them without studying kalam and mantiq, which is a prerequisite. It's like studying Arabic in order to read, a book of tafsir and understand i'rab. You don't study nahw and sarf, but you want to understand i'rab. That's impossible. Same thing over there. You don't study mantiq and kalam, and you want to understand the books of their usul, where the entire dalil is based off of mantiq and kalam. This is literally impossible. Okay. So it makes no sense. Because that's a prerequisite for studying their type of usul, because it was compiled by the mutakallimun. As for the Ḥanafī Uṣūl, we were saying that their tariqah is very different, and their tariqah is heavily far more reliant upon the masail, and therefore the mabahith mantiqiyya that they're using it's a lot lesser. طيب. Now, we'll mention a little bit of the history regarding the two madaris. So there were two madaris amongst the Hanafiya in Usul. Again, this is just a brief history. More detail, inshallah, you will have come across it in the intro. Number one, we have المدرسة العراقية الأصولية. بدأ ظهور هذه المدرسة منذ ظهور وانتشار أصول المذهب. So the actual Hanafi madrasa, the actual Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, they were all from Iraq. They were from al-Iraq. And the Hanafi madhab, the stronghold in the beginning was initially in al-Iraq. So we have two madaris usuliyah, one that affiliates with Iraq, and there's another madrasa which is known as al-Madrasa al-Samarqandiyya. This is the madrasa of the scholars of Ma Wara al-Nahr, because there were Hanafi scholars that went there as well, from the students of Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, and they spread the Hanafi madhab over there. Like, why are these two madaris distinct? There's a specific reason for it. So the beginning of the Hanafi madrasa in Iraq was at the hands of Isa ibn Aban, who is a student of Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. وهو أول من ورد عنه أصول مفصلة للمذهب. We don't have his actual works, but we have the works of al-Jassas, and he references him a lot. ثم امتدت المدرسة إلى شيوخ المذهب في القرن الثالث، ولم يصل إلينا من الفكر الأصولي لشيوخ المذهب في القرن الثالث، لكن كان ابتداء استنباط القواعد والمسائل الأصولية من الفروع الفقهية المروية عن الأئمة. طيب, Isa ibn Aban passed away in 221. From 221, right? So the 200s and the 300s. Like, between this, we don't have a lot of books that were compiled. We have, though, in the ends of, so in the 300s, al-Jassas al-Razi passes away in which year? 382. So that means he lived in the middle of the 3rd century. He compiled a book which is al-Fusul fil Usul. This book is our main primary reference that will tell us what was happening in this entire time. From the Usuli perspective. From a fiqhi perspective, we have books. Like Masail themselves, we have. That's mawjood. Right? Masail are mawjood. Masail are not a problem. Furu' fiqhiyya, mutun, they're not a problem. Zahir riwayah was there, the shuruh of Zahir riwayah are there, and even mutun, mukhtasarat are also there. Lakin the Usuli perspective, from that perspective, there was something happening here. What tells us what was happening is, we find it in this book. Like, what do we find in this book? We find this debating happening. Using Masail to determine what the Qa'ida Usuli is. Using Masail to determine what the Qa'ida Usuli is. So, Jassas sometimes will say, Isa ibn Aban, he held this opinion because of so-and-so. Abu al-Hasan al-Karaki held this opinion because of so-and-so. Abu Sa'id al-Barda'i held this opinion because of so-and-so. I feel this opinion is stronger because these furu' are aligned with this opinion. You have this taking place. Like, for example, he says, in one example, he says, وَمَذْهَبُ أَصْحَابِنَا الْقَوْنُ بِالْعُمُومِ فِي الْأَخْبَارِ وَالْأَوَامِرِ جَمِيعًا وَكَذَلِكَ كَانَ شيخنا أبو الحسن الكرخي رحمه الله يحكيه من مذهب أصحابنا جميعا وجميع من شاهدناه من شيوخنا واحتجاجهم لمسائلهم في كتبهم بعموم اللفظ مجردا من دلالة تقترن إليه في إيجاب العموم يقتضي ذلك. Okay, he's showing how their ihtijaj, their process of ihtijaj in their books using umumat indicates this. وذلك غير خاف على من عرف مذاهبهم. And sometimes he even brings examples. This was such an obvious example that he wasn't willing to actually elaborate on it. And he's like, this is so obvious, everyone should know it. But sometimes he actually brings examples and shows it as well. Okay. So now, the usul of the Hanafiya, we say, in these 2 centuries, they go into 3 categories. Number 1, ما كان رواية عن الأئمة أو ما يفهم بدلالة كلامهم. This is very rare. That riwayah directly from the Imam, or it's understood from the dalal of their kalam. This is uncommon. This is there, but it's uncommon. ما كان مخرجا على الفروع الفقهية المروية عن الأئمة. This is most common. This is very common. ما كان من آراء علماء الحنفية المتأخرين في المسائل الأصولية. This is found as well. Okay, this is the most common version. This is less common. All of the qawaid usuliyah that you find in our books, they will be of one of these 3 categories. Either the first category, which is very, very less common, and normally we don't resort to this category because to determine 100% they were upon that mas'ala, that itself is the mahallun nizaa. That's the point of contention. This is far more resorted to, and this is far more resorted to. Like, in this, there can be debates. When would you engage in debating these things? Okay, that is a far higher level than what we're going to engage in usul al-Shāshī. We're not going to engage in this level right now. This is the mutawwarat. Okay, this is more like research purposes. Arriving at conclusions, and this is very uncommon, very unlikely for any scholar today. But yes, you can study it, you can debate it, you can think about it, you can be like, elaborate on it, enjoy it, celebrate it. That can happen. But arriving at a conclusion and rewriting the usul of the Hanafiya, that's not happening anytime soon. Like, for that, you would have to, everyone from the Hanafiya would have to, يُسَلِّمُونَ لَكَ الْأَمْرِ. And there's some guys today that are trying to do this. They're trying to rewrite everything. Okay, like we say like aslan, yani how much, where's your furu' fiqhiyya? Al-Bazdawi had a massive book, mashallah, tabarakallah, that compiled all the furu' fiqhiyya from the beginning till the end. Same thing with Sarakhsi, same thing with al-Jassas, all of these people, they were masters in fiqh. Where are your books in fiqh? Bring your books in fiqh so we can see your faqaha first. Okay, only then are we going to be like, okay, now you can, if you want to come and tell us, for example, that they messed up in their usul and their extraction or their understanding of usul, ahlan wa sahlan, inshallah. Okay, before you wrote anything in fiqh, you don't have anything and you just want to come and be like, they messed up in usul, هذا يعني فيه ما فيه. And no one will accept it. So you would have to have a genius Hanafi that comes that pretty much every Hanafi in the world agrees with, or يسلمون له الأمر في فقاهته and so on and so forth. And even from an usuli and mantiq and aqli perspective. And then after that, this individual is coming and trying to debate the usul. That can happen. Okay. Is it happening currently? Wallahu alam, very unlikely. طيب. But this is where the usul the madahir of the usul really are taking place. Another important point over here. بدأ التأثر بعلم الكلام وبمذهب المعتزلة خاصة عند العراقيين. The Iraqiyun, we're talking about the 3rd and 4th century, so 300s and 300s. These scholars, and it's not only the Hanafi madhab, across the madhab, the Shafi'i madhab, the Hanbali madhab, all the madhab, they were heavily influenced by i'tizal. Why? Because Iraq was the place where i'tizal spread first. Ma'mun was in Iraq, and he was spreading i'tizal from Iraq. So the scholars were influenced by i'tizal beyond their choice. They didn't have a choice, but they were influenced by it. This also influenced a lot of the Hanafi scholars as well. In fact, there were many Hanafi scholars that were Mu'tazila. I keep saying Jassas al-Razi. Jassas al-Razi was a Mu'tazili. His teacher Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi was a Mu'tazili. There's no doubt in this. Anyone who reads their works and understands how the Mu'tazila frame things, understands that they were Mu'tazili in their fikriyah, in their manhaj aqadi. However, that doesn't mean they weren't great fuqaha as well. So this is also a misunderstanding. People, when they think about Mu'tazila, think about some distant, very, very distant group of individuals that were not scholars, they didn't know anything, they were just fools. No. Actually, the truth is the total opposite. They were very strong ulama. And they were very strong across the board. So you even have Shafi'i Mu'tazilis, right? That were very strong in Shafi'i fiqh. Very, very strong. We're not talking about average people. We're talking about exceptional scholars. But at the same time, they had inhiraf in their aqadi beliefs, which we're not minimalizing in any way. 100%, that's a problem. Sometimes their madhab aqadi could influence their fiqh. That is what we have to avoid. We can take their fawaid fiqhiyya if it's mujarrad fa'ida fiqhiyya. We can take their fa'ida lughawiyya if it's mujarrad just fa'ida lughawiyya. If they're telling us something about the Arabic language and their masters, in fact, many of the masters in Arabic language are Mu'tazili. Okay, many of the masters in Balagha are Mu'tazili. This is the truth. Like if you go into the books of if you look at the tarajim of these ulama. So we don't have an issue with taking fa'idah from what is beneficial for us in language or in balagha or in so on. The moment we know that their i'tizal is influencing their explanations, that is what we have an issue with. That is what we have to avoid. So if Jassas al-Razi gives a beautiful explanation of the Hanafi madhab, there's nothing wrong with that. Allah Rasul will look at it, we'll see and benefit from it. The moment we feel that his i'tizal influences his explanation, then it's like, okay, wait. Since we're not Mu'tazili, we can't explain like this. Okay, because we don't believe in the muqaddimat that he's using to prove this point. واضح? This is the fine line that has to be understood. So the madrasa Iraqiyya was an amazing madrasa, but it was influenced by i'tizal. Specifically, you had two major scholars, Abu al-Hasan al-Karhi and al-Jassas al-Razi. طيب. Now this might seem like a big problem, but we'll explain why it's not a big problem at all, even from a Hanafi perspective, inshallah ta'ala. What are the khasa'is of this madrasa? Number 1, بناء الأصول على الفروع الفقهية. Number 2, بناء أصول المذهب بما يتوافق مع أصولهم الكلامية الاعتزالية. طيب. So what they would do, this is really important. So remember how we said the 2 is coming from number 3? طيب. They would engage this. They would use مسائل فرعية to determine قواعد أصولية. But then what they would do, it was that they would explain these قواعد أصولية also in light of their أدلة عقلية that are موافق with الموافقة لأصولهم الاعتزالية. They would also explain this in line with their اعتزالي أصول. So this is a big problem. Well, obviously, we can't agree with this. The way they explain the qawaid from an adilla aqliya perspective, so it's in line with their i'tizali understanding. That can't be accepted. The masail far'iyya, the way they use the masail far'iyya to arrive at the qaida, if we know that this qaida has no influence by i'tizal, we can accept the qaida, we can also accept the masail far'iyya. It's not like everything they say we throw it out, the window. But we're not the ones doing that. Someone else, alhamdulillah, came and took care of that for us. That takes us to al-madrasa al-Samarqandiyya. What is al-madrasa al-Samarqandiyya? Al-madrasa al-Samarqandiyya is the madrasa of the ulama ma wara al-nahr. And this madrasa started with the students of Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani, and it continued across the centuries as well. Abu Hafs al-Kabir was a major student of Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani, and he was from Bukhara. He took the Hanafi madhab to Bukhara. In fact, the main dominant madhab in Bukhara from that time till today has always been the Hanafi madhab and the bilad of ma wara al-nahr in general. This madrasa though, was not upon, they were Mu'tazila. They were upon al-Kalam al-Maturidi. Okay. Meaning they were from the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay. They were from the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And they understood that the Iraqi Hanafis, number one, they had two problems with them. Number one is that their beliefs themselves were problematic. Number two is they also had a problem with them trying to hijack the Hanafi madhab. The Hanafi madhab was not an i'tizali madhab. Obviously, if there are some Mu'tazila that are Hanafi, they're going to try and prove that Imam Abu Hanifa was Mu'tazili as well, which is totally inaccurate. So they were trying to hijack the Hanafi madhab too. This is another big problem. This is a very big issue. That's why al-Bazdawi in the beginning of his Usul, you guys can look it up inshallah. Look up the Muqaddimah of al-Bazdawi's Usul. In the beginning of his Usul, he says that, he mentions this explicitly. He says, we have a problem. I'm going to paraphrase. He says, there's a problem. What's that problem? The problem is that there's people that are trying to claim that Imam Abu Hanifa was Mu'tazili. And then he's like, anyone who truly goes through the furu is obvious he wasn't Mu'tazili. You can't claim that he was Mu'tazili. So this issue also was there. So one was the issue of the Usuli perspective, if the Mu'tazila are influencing the Usul in any way. But another problem was the issue that they were trying to hijack the madhab, claiming that the Imam of the madhab were upon i'tizal as well. Okay, which cannot be accepted at all. Number three is that because they were more, so they took this mantiqi approach as well and this kalami approach as well, they also started focusing more on refining the words. And making the ta'rifat more precise. We'll go through a number of scholars that were from this tariqa, Madrasa of Samarkand, that are very influential in the main adopted usul that was adopted by everyone after, inshallah ta'ala, these scholars. Number one was al-Dabusi. Who is al-Dabusi? He's Abu Zayd, Abdullah or Ubaidullah bin Umar bin Isa al-Dabusi al-Bukhari al-Hanafi al-Qadi. So, la shak from the Bilad ma wara nahr, in the year, he passed away in the year 430. So we say, there were two major Sunni schools that emerged, led by Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. From that point, the Hanafi school began adopting, especially in the Bilads of ma wara al-Nahr, because Imam Maturidi himself was from the Bilad of ma wara al-Nahr. They adopted the Maturidi creed. By the 5th century, the Hanafis gradually shifted from the earlier Mu'tazili influenced Iraqi theology to the Maturidi theology of Samarkand. Okay, so this was a gradual influence. Number one, and you also find this, a lot of the Hanafi books that were compiled until the 4th, 5th century, these are compiled by the Mashayikh of Iraq. After the 5th century, all of the major books are compiled by scholars of Samarkand. Okay, that was the end of the Madrasa of Iraq, in fiqh and in usul. So 5th century is the shift. Okay, Al-Hidayah, for example, compiled by Al-Marghinani from the Bilad of ma wara al-Nahr. Okay, post-Quduri, basically. Post-Quduri, you have a shift, all of the Kasanis from the Bilad of ma wara al-Nahr, in Bidayah al-Sana'i. Likewise, the majority of books that are being compiled, Nasafi, all of these scholars are from where? Bilad of ma wara al-Nahr, and they are in line with the entire picture of the Hanafi madhab changes, and the entire i'tizali influence of the madrasa of Iraq, if it had any influence on that madrasa, it changed from that madrasa all towards the approach and the presentation and the organization and the methodology of the Maturidi scholars in the Bilad of ma wara al-Nahr. In fact, from that time till now, it's impossible to meet a Hanafi who isn't Maturidi at the same time, because the madhab is intertwined and it's explained purely through Maturidi kalam. Okay, and a lot of people misunderstand this. The same thing goes with the Shafi'i madhab with the Ash'ari kalam. You cannot find a Shafi'i who is an Ash'ari. The majority of the scholars were Ash'ari in their theology, and they explain the madhab through Ash'ari kalam. And same thing goes with Maliki and the Ash'ari. واضح? The majority of Malikiya are Ash'ari. Yes, maybe you'll find some Malikiya, some Shafi'iyya that were adopting the Athari creed, but this is very rare. The majority of them, and the majority of the explanation of that madhab. And if you really want to study, so what we can do this by the way of this, guys, ahbab. If you truly want to master the Shafi'i madhab in the form that is approached by amongst the mutaakhirun, you have to study it through as it's intertwined with the Ash'ari understanding as well, the mutakallimun. Same thing with the scholars, the same thing with the Maliki madhab. The Hanbali madhab, this is a madhab that inshallah we can have another discussion afterwards because it requires more detail, inshallah ta'ala. Like it's a madhab that is a little bit of everything, to be honest. It's been influenced by everyone, but it also hasn't been influenced by everyone. So you can find a lot of different ways you can study this madhab. You can find Hanbalis that are Ash'ari, you can also find Hanbalis that are Atharis, but when they're Athari, some of them are Mufawwida, some of them are obviously inaccurately, but they will be Mujassima. Some of them, for example, are Taymiyyah. Like within the Hanbalis, you find a lot of different, mashallah, tabarakallah, variety, and it becomes complicated a little bit. Now, but as for the Hanafi scholars, the Hanafi madhab is heavily influenced by Maturidi creed. So usually these two go hand in hand since the 5th century onwards. Like we say, this marked the decline of Mu'tazilism within the Hanafi school and the firm establishment of the Maturidi doctrine to the extent that Hanafi and Maturidi became closely associated thereafter. As a result of this theological shift in the 5th century, significant changes occurred in legal theory of the Hanafi school, beginning with Imam al-Dubusi. Imam al-Dubusi was really the start of this. It increased after him, but he was the start of this refining, and anything that was coming from al-Fusul fil Usul or by Jassas al-Razi or anyone from that taraf, from the Iraqiyun, they would put a pause on it, they would put filters, and they would make sure that the I'tizali influence was being removed, starting with al-Dubusi. So he studied under scholars initially from Samarkand, then he later moved to Baghdad, so he also absorbed. So this is the miza of al-Dubusi. He knew the Samarkandi understanding and Maturidi creed before, and then he went to Baghdad and he was exposed to the Iraqi understanding. Like this is why he was able to do what he did. Like he absorbed methods of teaching by the Iraqi scholars. As a result, he combined both traditions and became one of the leading Hanafi scholars in legal theory. In his work Taqweem al-Adillah, he developed a methodological approach that blended the two schools. Okay. He leaned more towards the Iraqi method by extensively using legal cases. So again, the Samarqandi method, normally they weren't so reliant on the Masail al-Fara'iyya. They were approaching it more from a Kalami perspective, just like Usul al-Mutakallimin. He liked the idea of using Masail al-Fara'iyya that was found amongst the Iraqiyun more. He brought this into the books of Usul. Okay? Frequently citing them throughout his works, he also followed the Iraqi in many Usuli issues. Like in Usuli issues as well. Like I said, the Qawaid Usuliyya don't have to be wrong just because they were adopted by who? The Iraqiyun. Okay? As long as you can determine that this has no influence by I'tizal, it could be completely fine. So he did adopt many of the Qawaid Usuliyya of the Iraqiyun. However, he differed from them by rejecting their Mu'tazilite theological foundations. Now, when he found in their books them trying to then explain these Qawaid Usuliyya after using the Furu', then explain it also using Usul of I'tizal, he would differ. Instead, aligning with the Maturidi scholars of Samarkand, at the same time, he did not adopt their heavy reliance on speculative theology, maintaining a balance between theology and legal reasoning. So it was a merge that occurred between these two madaris, while at the same time, he was trying to remove all of the I'tizali influence, Kalami influence, and at the same time, trying to make his far more practical using the Masail al-Fara'iyya. Now, he agreed with the scholars of Samarkand in defining terms precisely and employing logic and dialectics. This is reflected in his structured approach, including detailed definitions and his distinctive use of 4-part classifications. We're going to study, inshallah, the wujuhul, the different ways to look at it. Min hayth al-wada'. Then you have al-isti'mal, or before that you have bayan, al-bayan, then isti'mal, and then istidlal, right? Wujuhul wada', and then you say, when wujuhul wada', there's 4 categories. عام خاص مشترك المؤول. من وجوه البيان there's 4 categories that are مقابلة 4. Then استعمال there's 4. حقيقي مشترك, and so on and so forth. And then استدلال there are 4. Who made this? Who came up with this whole presentation? 4 by 4. So putting 4 in 4. That was Dubusi. Dubusi is the one who came up with this. Everyone followed him after it. So he liked this logical approach. He liked this beautiful presentation. He liked this idea of we want to present it in the most beautiful and structured manner. Al-Dubusi also made original contributions to Usul al-Fiqh, particularly in the study of Qiyas. Okay, this is another major benefit. He expanded the mabhath of Qiyas like none other before him. And everyone benefited from him expanding. So he is really the one who laid the foundations of the mabahith that are discussed in qiyas, even in the other madhahib. He was amongst the first to systematically discuss methods for identifying legal causes, ilal, and what are the masalik al-illah, distinguishing between related concepts such as cause, condition, and sign, making sure that you make a difference between the sabab and the shart, okay, and the alama. What's the difference between two? He's the one who showed these differences, subtle differences. And he addressed valid versus invalid objections to legal reasoning. What are the wujuhu daf'il qiyas? What are those? They're all going back to Debussy. So this whole debate regarding qiyas, how do you establish a qiyas is correct versus incorrect? The one who was the pioneer of all of this was Abu Zayd al-Debussy, even for the other madhahib. His work significantly refined and advanced the discipline, as noted by Ibn Khaldun, who regarded his contributions as completing and perfecting the science of usul al-fiqh. Ya salam. Then after him, we had two other individuals, al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi. Al-Bazdawi passed away in 482, al-Sarakhsi passed away in 493. Okay. The works of al-Debussy were further developed and completed by Fakhr al-Islam al-Bazdawi and Shams al-A'imma al-Sarakhsi. Together they refined, organized, and fully established the principles and discussions of Hanafi legal theory, clearly defining its concepts and terminology. Now, their contributions became authoritative in the school when they agreed on a matter. This position, why are they important? When they agreed on a matter, this position was treated as definitive. Their qawl became the qawl mu'tamad. When Abu al-Bazdawi and Sarakhsi agreed on a qawl, it became the mu'tamad for everyone that came after them. When they differed, later scholars did not go beyond their views. They would just give tarjih to one of the two views. Okay, but they barely differed, or rarely differed. The majority of the usuli texts that come after them, this is very important. The majority of the usuli texts that are studying the Hanafi madhab, that are coming after them, all are going back to the works of al-Bazdawi and Sarakhsi. Manar al-Anwar is a mukhtasar of al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi. Usul al-Shāshī heavily goes back to these works as well. Everyone that came, al-Husami, same thing. And in fact, this is the madrasa of usul that's studied by the Hanafis after al-Bazdawi and Sarakhsi is basically mukhtasarat of al-Bazdawi and Sarakhsi. And that's why if you really want to understand this madhab, you go back to who? Al-Bazdawi and Sarakhsi and all the shuruh that are compiled upon their works, and so on and so forth. Okay, this didn't always remain the usul though. Later scholars, they expanded and they adopted the tariqah of muqarana, and in that they also further, because they adopted the tariqah of muqarana, they further expanded. So there is an expanding that comes after this, but overall, if you're studying usul al-Shāshī and you're studying Manar al-Anwar and you're studying Husami, you are studying within this madrasa. And until you get to Talweeh or until you get to the other books, that is your first time you're going to get exposed to beyond this madrasa. If you never get there, then you're never going to get exposed aslan, which you should get exposed to, because the mutaakhirun, the later scholars, mutaakhirun meaning as of right now, where it's really a merge between these two. We're not only relying on the madrasa of the Iraqiyun, we heavily rely on the madrasa of the ones that did jama' between the madaris and the scholars that came later as well. Later scholars particularly adopted al-Bazdawi's structure for organizing usuli topics, as he excelled in clarity, systemization, and presentation. As a result, his arrangements became the standard model for later manuals, even when summarizing both his and Sarakhsi's contributions. His tariqah, his methodology, his presentation is the one adopted. They also differed from al-Debussy in that they were more clearly influenced by kalam, especially Maturidi doctrine. So al-Debussy, we said he was trying to avoid the kalami rhetoric. These scholars, no, they were far more influenced by it in shaping and selecting usuli principles. They more explicitly rejected the Mu'tazilite theological foundations used by the Iraqi scholars and instead aligned with the Samarqandi approach. As a result, the usul issues that were related to theological difference became firmly established in the Ḥanafī Uṣūl according to their formulations and choices. So after this marhala, we have the marhala of istiqrar. When did the istiqrar? The Hanafi school of legal theory ultimately becomes firmly grounded in the works of al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi. After them, many concise texts, which are called mutun in usul al-fiqh, emerged, summarizing their writings and expanding on their writings. Scholars devoted great attention to studying, teaching, and producing commentaries on these works. Everything goes back to those two works. That's the point. Again, this will continue until eventually there is another madrasa that emerges at the hands of Sadr al-Sharia and other scholars that go into the usul al-mutakallimun and they get influenced by them as well, and they combine everything that will come after that. Again, more detail regarding that, inshallah, you can study in the intro. Important works. So number one, we had al-Fusul fil Usul by Jassas. This gives you 200s and 300s, right? Everything is happening in the 200s, 300s. This is going to give you the entire picture of that. But the issue with that is i'tizari rhetoric is there. There's no doubt in that. Okay. But likewise, there is debates, munadhara, or let's call it muqarana between the qawaid usuliyya amongst the Hanafi scholars. And he debates them. Sometimes he proves one opinion over the other one, correct versus incorrect. When is this? The 200s, 300s. Okay, we wouldn't suggest people to go straight to this book. Students should not be going straight to this work. Why? Because again, you have no idea if you haven't studied kalam. You have no idea what is i'tizali rhetoric versus what is not. Like, so don't go straight to it. Then you had Taqweem al-Adilla by Abu Zayd al-Dabusi. Okay, this book is really amazing, but the problem with this work is that it's not beginner friendly, and it's not necessarily. It was refined and it was presented better for beginner students, obviously, as time goes on. Like, this was explained by al-Bazdawi as well as summarized by other scholars as well. Then we have Kanzul Wusul ila Ma'rifat al-Usul. This is Usul al-Bazdawi and Usul al-Sarakhsi. These two works are really important as well. And again, we wouldn't suggest for beginner students to go into this because it's just too much, so much information. It's a lot more complicated than the Mukhtasarat. But these two are really the pioneer works that everyone resorts to then. Usul al-Samarqandi, this is the main marja', primary source for Bilad Ma Wara al-Nahr. The usul of, for the tariqah of who? Ma Wara al-Nahr. Okay, so what are the opinions of Ma Wara al-Nahr? You're going to find that primarily where in Usul al-Samarqandi. Like al-Muntakhab al-Husami, this is a concise text covering all topics of usul, largely based on al-Bazdawi's work, presenting principles in a structured form and incorporating many legal cases from the works of Muhammad al-Shaybani. This is a good work. It's usually studied level 3 or level 4. Al-Manar by al-Nasafi, this was a really good work. He summarized the works of al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi in a very small mukhtasar, and it was meant to be memorized. Al-Manar is meant to be memorized. They used to memorize it, so like we just get the main points, inshallah ta'ala. But then why is it such a good work? Because it was accepted amongst the scholars, and they wrote many shuruh upon it and many commentaries and debated it, and they taught it and they made people memorize it, and so it became a work which was accepted amongst the Hanafiya. That's why it becomes a really important stopping point for Hanafi students. Like, now these two works, this is indicating towards what happened after that. So we did have a degree of Sadr al-Sharia in Tawdeeh. This was another marhala that started, which is that some Hanafi scholars had access to Usul al-Mutakallimin as well. So they compiled, doing jama and comparing between the Usul of the Hanafi and the Usul al-Mutakallimin. Okay, this was a really important marhala that also came into existence. And in that, they were giving, they refined as well the madhhab to a degree. They held their own opinions, like Sadr al-Sharia, for example. Sometimes he debated, he disagreed with al-Dabusi and al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi. He held other opinions and he presented them in his work. And other scholars as well came afterwards to follow that. This has to be studied. This tariqah has to be studied because this is really the stamp in the end. It has to be studied after you master the Bazdawi tariqah. So the first approach would be mastering everything that's going back to the madrasa that goes back, leads up to al-Sarakhsi and al-Bazdawi. So that is through what? That is through Usul al-Shāshī and al-Manar al-Anwar and al-Husami. These three works. If you study them properly, especially resorting to the shuruh of al-Bazdawi and the shuruh of those works themselves, then you're really gonna get that understanding. Like, what's also interesting, ahbab, is that in some of the shuruh of Manar al-Anwar and some of the shuruh of Usul al-Shāshī, they will resort to these books. They will resort to these books, which will give you a very different perspective. So the teacher can sometimes resort to those books. And technically, it's not really in line with that madrasa, but they will resort to them and they will mention them. So it's good to have a little bit of an understanding that madrasa, that this other marhala also exists. Like, in overall, your main foundation, your main framework is going to be based on the Bazdawi tariqah. Then after you study this tariqah, then you go to the other tariqah as well. Okay. So now what's the ideal way of studying Ḥanafī Uṣūl? We say the first level is the most important. In the first level, because that is the level of ta'sil, which is the level of laying the foundation. The teacher has to explain the masail in a way that the students are able to comprehend the masail, not focusing too much on the words, not focusing too much on the book doesn't matter. The teacher matters more. The teacher really needs to know the masail and be able to explain them in a good way in order for the student to be able to digest them. The first level is the most important. In that, there's a lot of books that are compiled. I didn't feel, for example, that a lot of contemporary scholars are trying to fill the gaps and fill the holes and put in a more presentable manner and so on and so forth. And there are amazing books that are compiled by a lot of contemporary scholars regarding this. You also had, for example, Mabadi al-Uṣūl, which was compiled. Mabadi al-Uṣūl became famous, and very famous because it's really just a mukhtasar Usul al-Shāshī. Lakin, wallahu a'lam, what's happening in Mabadi al-Uṣūl in a lot of our institutions is that you're just reading it, translating it. The students have no idea what's actually going on and just memorizing it. That too, if they complete it. Half of them don't even complete it. So it's not really establishing ta'sil in the understanding. You're just reading and translating. Students are not even strong in Arabic at that point. And then you just go straight on to Usul al-Shāshī. So we replaced that with another work, and that is in our Ḥanafī Uṣūl 101, and a different method of explanation as well. After the first level, you come to Usul al-Shāshī. In Usul al-Shāshī, the idea will be, inshallah ta'ala, that you have to do Usul al-Shāshī. I wouldn't say do anything else. Why? Because Usul al-Shāshī is an accepted work. And al-Fiqh al-Ma'lufi shadid. We do Usul al-Shāshī. But in Usul al-Shāshī, we're not really focusing on Ta'sil anymore. Ta'sil was already done. Yes, we're still going to mention those points, but we're not going to elaborate on them to create Ta'sil. We're going to focus more on the examples he brings. And we're going to look at how other Hanafi scholars in the shuruh, they contest these examples. Well, this is the beautiful part of Usul al-Shāshī. We're going to look at the examples, and we're going to see how scholars are contesting these examples. See how scholars are debating these examples. Not everyone agrees with all the examples. There's a reason why. Okay, they go back and forth. And we explain that this reality can exist. So this will develop in the mind of a student a degree of understanding with more precision how these qawaid usuli are meant to be implemented. By number one, understanding the correct examples, how they're being implemented, and also understanding the wrong implementation, possibly, which is contested by some scholars. This will develop the application of these qawaid usuliyya in the mind of the students. After Usul al-Shāshī, you go to Manar al-Anwar. Now, Manar al-Anwar, when you study that matan, you're going to use shuruh, and the teacher will resort to certain shuruh. You can teach it with a sharh, you don't have to. But if you teach that matan, the main primary goal over there should be, again, there's going to be more examples, but the main primary goal over there should be start getting exposed to the shuruh of al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi's works, the major shuruh, and also the shuruh of Manar al-Anwar, and get exposed to more detail regarding this madrasa Iraqiyya. Not madrasa Iraqiyya, the madrasa that goes back to al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi. طيب. After Manar al-Anwar, why is Husami brought? Husami is only brought for qiyas. So he elaborated more on qiyas, as opposed to Usul al-Shāshī. Qiyas is very brief. Manar al-Anwar is also not as extensive. Husami elaborated more on it. That's why they brought Husami to teach qiyas from Husami. Otherwise, and you can technically study from the beginning as well, but you would be pretty much resorting to the same shuruh of al-Bazdawi and al-Sarakhsi, and likewise the shuruh of Manar and the shuruh of Husami itself. It's all in line with that same school of thought. After that, you go to works like Tawdeeh and Tanqih, and you can also go to Mir'at al-Usul, and this would start getting you exposed to the madrasa of al-Jama' bayna al-Tariqayn, which is the second one, which is combining the two methodologies. So combining the Hanafi and Shafi approach, or combining the Hanafi and Mutakallimin approaches. This occurred by scholars as well, starting with Badi' al-Nizam, and then you had At-Tanqih. One of the most famous works that was compiled over here was At-Talweeh by At-Taftazani, which is a hashiyah upon Tanqih, which is a sharh of Tawdeeh by Sadr al-Sharia. This is really, really important, and it's going to expose you to debating within these schools using the Kalami rhetoric as well, and showing how the Hanafi school works along with that madhhab, the madhhab of the Mutakallimin, and doing muqarana between the two. Really, really important work. Students would get exposed to this and level in, at this point, this would be level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5. But in reality, let's say the Mabadi al-Usul or level 1 is like level 0. So level 0, then Usul al-Shāshī, level 1, level 2 would be Manar, level 3 al-Husami, and this would be level 4. طيب. You have other works as well. After this, after Talweeh, then you go to some of the most amazing works that are compiled. You can either do Tahrir, portions of that, or you can do Musallam al-Thubut, portions of that. These works are the last work that you will be exposed to. They combine everything that was there in the past with very mukhtasar ibara. So it is literally an application of all of the alat that you're meant to have studied by then. Literally an application of all of the alat. The kalamiyya, the alat kalamiyya, as well as mantiqiyya, and likewise usuliyya, the qawaid you already studied. It's just an application, and it's just really just training your mind to be able to decipher the codifications of the scholars and the works of the scholars, and it opens the horizons and expands the horizons in the mind of the student. This is the method that you should be studying, the Hanafi tariqah. Alhamdulillah, with that we completed our precise summary of the Hanafi tariqah in usul. After this, inshallah, we'll speak regarding Usul al-Shāshī specifically, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.